On March 23, 1860, every newspaper in Mobile, Alabama, ran the exact same headline. A 19-year-old man had just been sold at the Royal Street auction house for a price that smashed every record the state had ever seen. The papers described him as the finest, most remarkable male slave ever offered for sale in that building. But there was one thing those articles never mentioned, one thing the auctioneer never told the crowd, something so unbelievable that 11 people who stood in that room that day later took an oath in court and said the young man on the platform simply could not have been real, not because of the way he looked, but because of what he could do. Mobile's richest families bid against one another until the price went through the roof. One family finally won him. 4 months later, that family was completely broken. The official paperwork from the sale was sealed by the Alabama legislature in 1861 and has never been opened to the public since, for more than 160 years. Nobody asked the question that now seems so obvious. Why on earth would anyone pay a huge fortune for a slave who could prove, right in front of everyone, that he was smarter than the man who owned him? Before I go any further with the story of the Royal Street auction house and the young man who never should have stood on that block, I want to ask you a favor. If you're watching this from Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, or anywhere else along the Gulf Coast, please leave a comment and tell me what state you're in. What happened in Mobile in 1860 may have reached into your own family's past. And if you want more forgotten stories like this one, stories people worked hard to keep quiet, please hit that subscribe button right now. The real beginning isn't in Mobile at all. It starts 52 miles north of the city, near a small town called Claiborne, in a beautiful spot high above the Alabama River. The place was called Riverside Academy, and most history books act like it never existed. It wasn't a regular plantation, even though plantation money built every part of it. Riverside Academy was far stranger and, to many people back then, far more upsetting. In 1831, a doctor named Thaddeus Whitmore used his own wealth to open a private school. His whole purpose was to test an idea that some Southerners found thrilling and others thought was downright dangerous. Dr. Whitmore was certain that intelligence had nothing to do with race. He believed it came from good teaching and the right sort. Give any child the same education, he said, and that child could learn just as much as any white child. He spent the next 30 years proving it, quietly. Over those decades, he bought around 40 enslaved children all under 5 years old, and already showing clear signs of being unusually bright. He brought them to the academy and taught them everything wealthy white children studied: Latin, Greek, higher mathematics, science, great literature, and music. He wrote down every step of their progress in thick, leather-covered journals that eventually filled an entire library wall. His dream was to give the South proof nobody could argue with that. Slavery wasn't just wrong, it was wasteful. Brilliant minds were being forced to pick cotton when they could have been lawyers, doctors, or professors. Most planters thought he was crazy. His own relatives said he was a threat. The Alabama legislature looked into him twice, trying to find a legal way to shut the school down, but they never could. The children were legally his property, and back then a man could do whatever he wanted with what belonged to him. Dr. Thaddeus Whitmore died in January 1860 at the age of 73, after giving 30 years of his life to this work. In his will, he left the academy and everyone who lived there to his nephew, Jonathan Whitmore. He gave very clear orders. The teaching had to keep going, and when each person reached 30 years old, they were to be freed and sent to Liberia in Africa to live as free citizens. Jonathan Whitmore was 41, a cotton broker in Mobile who owed a lot of money and liked spending even more. When he read the will, he didn't see his uncle's dream. He saw money. 40 highly trained, highly educated people who could be sold for top dollar to rich families looking for private teachers, secretaries, accountants, or translators. The education his uncle had given them to prove they were equal human beings had accidentally turned them into some of the most expensive property anyone had ever seen. On February 3, 1860, Jonathan showed up at Riverside Academy with a professional appraiser named Vernon Clay and two experienced slave traders from Mobile. What they walked into was even better than Jonathan had hoped. There was a big 3-story main building with real classrooms, a library holding more than 4,000 books, science laboratories, music rooms with several pianos, and clean, comfortable sleeping quarters, nothing like the rough cabins most enslaved people lived in. Outside were gardens for studying plants, an observatory with a large telescope, and workshops full of tools and machines. Then there were the people themselves, men and women mostly in their 20s and early 30s, who could speak several languages, work out hard math problems in their heads, and talk about books and big ideas better than most white men fresh out of college. Vernon Clay spent 3 full days talking to them, testing them, and reading Dr. Whitmore's journals. When he handed in his report, it was short but stunning, even using very careful numbers. The 40 residents together were worth more than $180,000 if sold one by one to the right buyers. Several of them were so outstanding that they could easily bring more than $10,000 each. The very highest price tag went to a 19-year-old named Benjamin Bell. Benjamin was the youngest person Dr. Whitmore had ever taken in, and almost certainly the most brilliant. He had arrived at the academy when he was 3 years old, bought from a plantation near Montgomery after his mother died giving birth to him. No one knew who his father was. Dr. Whitmore's notes from 1844, when Benjamin was only 3, already called him amazingly quick and curious. By the time he was 6, Benjamin was reading whole books in English. At 8, he started Latin and regular math. At 10, he was reading ancient Greek and doing advanced algebra. By 15, he was working side by side with Dr. Whitmore on brand new mathematics that no one else had figured out yet. The very last thing Dr. Whitmore wrote in his journal, just 3 days before he died, was about Benjamin. Today, Benjamin showed me a completely new way to approach the Goldbach conjecture. I truly believe it is original work. Whether it holds up under review by university mathematicians remains to be seen, but the creativity is breathtaking. He is 19 years old. If he had been born white in Boston or Philadelphia, he would be the star pupil at Harvard or Yale right now. Instead, he is here legally my property, and, after I am gone, his future rests entirely on Jonathan's character. I pray I have not misjudged my nephew. He had. Jonathan looked at Benjamin Bell and saw a walking gold mine worth more than 12 strong field hands put together. He saw a way to pay off his debts and grow his business. He saw nothing but profit. On February 15th, Jonathan called all 40 residents into the main hall and told them exactly what was going to happen. Dr. Whitmore is dead, he said, straight out. The academy belongs to me now. And so do all of you. My uncle's will said you were supposed to be freed and sent to Liberia, but the same will left you to me, and I get to decide what happens to my property. He stopped for a moment to let that sink in. I've decided to sell every one of you. You'll be auctioned in Mobile over the next few months. My uncle gave you an education, and that education makes you valuable. You'll be bought by fine families who need tutors, secretaries, or bookkeepers. This is actually a good thing for you. You'll live in nice houses, work inside, and use what you've learned. It's a lot better than working in the fields. A woman named Sarah, one of the oldest residents at 32, stood up. Double quotes, Dr. Whitmore promised us we would be free, she said. He told us this education was to prepare us for freedom, not to be sold. Jonathan didn't even blink. Dr. Whitmore is dead, he answered. His promises died with him. I'm the owner now, and this is how it's going to be. You will cooperate. You will show buyers what you can do, and you will be thankful for the chances your education gives you. Do you understand me?" Silence. I said. "Do you understand me?" He repeated, louder and harder. "Yes, sir," a few voices finally answered. Benjamin Bell sat quietly in the back row. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Jonathan Whitmore with a calm, unreadable expression, maybe doing the math in his head, maybe already working on a problem that needed solving. Over the next 6 weeks, Jonathan got everything ready for the sales. He brought in special trainers to teach the residents how to act in front of buyers, how to show off their skills without ever looking too smart or threatening. The trick was to prove how useful they were while still acting properly obedient, so no buyer would feel uneasy about owning someone who might be brighter than they were. Some of the residents went along with it. They knew fighting would only make things worse. Others, like Sarah, refused point blank. They had been promised freedom, and they were not going to help sell themselves into a lifetime of servitude. The ones who refused to play along got no mercy. Jonathan simply sold them right away straight to big plantations, where they would spend the rest of their lives, bent over in cotton rows. 7 people went that way, their years of learning thrown away like it never happened. In the old Latin Dr. Whitmore had loved to teach. You might call it poor encouragement. The message was plain: fall in line, or be crushed. Benjamin watched every bit of it with the same quiet, steady look on his face. He showed up to every training session, did exactly what he was told, answered every question perfectly. But the trainers, the appraisers, even Jonathan himself, felt something off when they were around him. It was his eyes, like he was always working something out, always 3 or 4 moves ahead. His obedience didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a plan. One night Vernon Clay, the appraiser, pulled Jonathan aside. "That bellboy makes my skin crawl," he said. "He's too sharp. Whoever buys him better know what they're getting." Jonathan just laughed. "Too sharp is exactly why he'll bring the highest price in Alabama. There are families in this town who'll pay anything for a private tutor who can teach their sons Latin, Greek, and higher math before breakfast." "That's not what I'm talking about," Clay said. "You can see the wheels turning. He's not broken. He's waiting." Jonathan brushed it off. He's 19 years old, with no money, no friends, and nowhere to go. The smartest thing he can do is exactly what he's doing now: behave, and hope he lands in a decent house. Stop fretting. Clay was right, though. Benjamin was waiting and planning. He just hadn't decided on the final move yet. The big sale was set for March 23rd at the Royal Street Auction House, the fanciest place in Mobile for high-dollar slaves. Jonathan wanted Benjamin to go first. A jaw-dropping opening price would get the whole crowd excited and push the rest of the sales even higher. For the 2 weeks before the auction, Benjamin and 3 others from the academy were kept in Jonathan's townhouse in Mobile. They stayed in a nice upstairs bedroom, but the door was locked from the outside and a guard sat in the hallway. Every night, Benjamin used every daylight hour in Jonathan's library. He read every book he could reach, but mostly he was thinking, turning his situation over and over in his mind like a chess problem. The law was brutally simple. He was property. No papers said otherwise. No family could claim him. Everything Dr. Whitmore had taught him about justice and the rights of man was beautiful in a book and worthless in an Alabama courtroom in 1860. Running was possible in theory. Mobile was a busy port with ships going north every day. But he had no cash, no friends on the docks, and his face was already too well known. He was one of Whitmore's educated Negroes. If they caught him, the punishment for a smart runaway was always worse: sold farther south, maybe crippled so he could never try again. He could keep cooperating, get sold to the kindest buyer he could find, and wait years for a better chance. But that would mean giving in, helping sell himself, throwing away everything Dr. Whitmore had believed about human dignity. Or he could take one big risk, something that might get him killed. but at least it would be his choice. On March 19th, 4 days before the auction, Benjamin asked Jonathan for a private talk. They met in the study. Jonathan sat behind his big desk. Benjamin stood. "Sir," Benjamin began, calm and polite, "I've been thinking about the sale. I believe I can help you get the very best price." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Go on. Buyers want someone useful, but not frightening, smart enough to be valuable, humble enough to stay in his place. I can give them that, but only if I really believe it myself. Right now I'm still angry about Dr. Whitmore's promises. If I could read his journals, the ones where he explains everything he was trying to do, I think I could come around to seeing that you're doing the only practical thing left. It would make my performance at the auction more convincing." It was clever flattering Jonathan's ego, while asking for exactly what Benjamin needed. Jonathan thought for a second, then shrugged. "Fine. The journals are in the library. 3rd shelf, brown leather, marked by year. You can read them during the day. They don't leave that room. Will this actually help?" "I believe it will, sir. Thank you." For the next 3 days, Benjamin read 30 years of Dr. Whitmore's private writing, every note on every student, every thought about race and intelligence, every letter to lawyers and abolitionists up north, and in the volumes from 1858 and 1859, he found gold. There were long letters from a Boston attorney named Samuel Griswold. They talked about legal ways to free the Academy residents later on, cases in free states, precedents where courts had freed slaves who could prove extraordinary ability or education. One letter laid it out plainly. If a slave could publicly demonstrate intelligence far beyond the average white citizen, and if there was written proof of years of advanced education, Alabama courts might one day have a hard time keeping that person enslaved if a freedom suit ever reached a sympathetic judge. The journals themselves were the proof. 30 years of records no one could fake, and Jonathan, too greedy to be careful, had just handed Benjamin the keys. The night before the auction, March 22nd, after the house was asleep, Benjamin sat at a small table with a single candle. He wrote, for hours, on paper he had taken from the library. First, a short, clear summary of Dr. Whitmore's entire experiment, quoting dates and pages from the journals. Second, the legal points from the Boston lawyer word for word. Third, a calm, logical argument, part philosophy, part law, explaining why the Academy residents should be freed, not sold. And last, something nobody would expect, a brand new mathematical proof. He picked one of the hardest unsolved problems Dr. Whitmore had ever mentioned, and wrote out what he believed was the answer. It might not be perfect, he was 19, and cut off from the latest research, but it was beautiful. Original work that only a handful of mathematicians in the whole country could even follow. He folded the pages small, slid them inside his shirt next to his skin, and blew out the candle. Tomorrow, when every eye in the room was on him, he would have one chance. He didn't know if it would free him, ruin him, or kill him, but at least it would be his move. March 23, 1860, broke warm and sunny. By 9 o'clock the Royal Street auction house was packed. Wealthy planters in their best coats, curious onlookers, newspaper reporters, everyone who had heard rumors about Whitmore's educated slaves and wanted to see the show for themselves. The auction room at Royal Street looked more like a courthouse than a slave market. High ceilings, tall windows pouring in bright morning light, rows of polished chairs filled with Mobile's finest gentlemen and a few determined ladies, all dressed in their Sunday best. These were people who didn't blink at spending thousands of dollars before lunch. Jonathan Whitmore arrived early with Benjamin and the 3 others who would be sold that day. Benjamin had been dressed with care, a plain but perfectly cut dark wool suit, crisp white shirt, shoes shined until they gleamed. The idea was to look educated and respectable without looking like he was trying to be white. He waited in a small side room, hands folded, face calm, almost peaceful. The other three were not calm. Clara, who could speak French, Italian, and Spanish like a native, kept twisting a handkerchief in her fingers. Thomas, the quiet accountant, stared at the floor. Young Daniel, the science student, looked ready to be sick. Benjamin reached over and gently touched Clara's hand. "No matter what happens out there," he whispered, "remember who you really are. Remember what Dr. Whitmore knew you were. Hold on to that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Benjamin, I know you're planning something. I can see it. What are you going to do?" He gave the smallest smile. "I'm going to tell the truth. That's all." At 10 o'clock sharp, the auctioneer, Mr. Hamilton Pierce, a man who had sold thousands of human beings over 20 years, took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing out clear and practiced, "today, you will witness something never before offered in the state of Alabama. From the estate of the late Dr. Thaddeus Whitmore, we present individuals of exceptional education and refinement. These are not field hands. These are scholars fit for the finest homes." He paused, letting the room lean forward. "We open with the jewel of the collection, Benjamin Bell, age 19, Riverside Academy." Two attendants lead Benjamin onto the high wooden platform. The room went quiet, in a way it rarely did. Benjamin was tall, almost 6 feet, with a straight back, clear brown skin, and eyes that looked straight out at the crowd instead of down at his shoes. He didn't shift nervously. He simply stood, meeting their stares, as if he were the one deciding what they were worth. Pierce read from the card Jonathan had prepared. 19 years old, fluent in English, Latin, and Greek, master of advanced mathematics, geometry, algebra, calculus, well-read in history, literature, and natural philosophy, has assisted in original research. Perfect health. Temperament, intelligent and obedient. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd at those last 3 words, intelligent and obedient. The two ideas didn't usually fit together. "Let's see what he can do," Pierce said with a showman's smile. "Benjamin, translate this into Latin. Education is the foundation of wisdom and virtue." Without a second's pause, educatio fundamentum, est sapientia, et virtutis. Correct? Now, a merchant buys cotton at 6 cents a pound, sells it at 9, but pays 2 cents a pound to ship it. What is his profit on $1,000 worth? $10, sir. Explain Newton's law of universal gravitation, in your own words. Benjamin answered smoothly, clearly, even giving the formula with the correct symbols. The room buzzed. This was no parlor trick. This was real learning. Pierce beamed. "We opened the bidding at $4,000. The numbers shot upward like fireworks. 5,000, 6, 7, 8. Soon only 2 bidders remained. Judge Aldrich, who wanted a brilliant tutor for his sons, and Mrs. Helena Crane, the wealthy widow who ran Mobile's finest school for young ladies. 9,500. Mrs. Crane called coolly. 10,000. Judge Aldrich fired back. $10,000 was a fortune more than most men earned in 5 or 6 years. Pierce looked to Mrs. Crane. "Madam," she opened her mouth, ready to top him, and Benjamin spoke. His voice was steady, educated, and carried to the back wall without effort. "I can prove the Pythagorean theorem 5 different ways, including one Euclid never published. I can read Plato's Republic in the original Greek and discuss it for hours. I can solve differential equations. I have read medical textbooks and understood them. My abilities are greater than most white graduates of the colleges represented in this room." Dead silence. Pierce went white. "You will be silent." Benjamin paid no attention. "And yet here I stand, priced like an ox. This sale rests on a lie that the color of a man's skin decides the power of his mind. Dr. Thaddeus Whitmore spent 30 years proving that lie false. His journal's 30 years of records show that the only difference between me and any man in this room is the chance I was given." Jonathan was already charging the platform, face purple, shouting for someone to gag him. Benjamin pulled the folded papers from inside his shirt and held them high. I have here an original mathematical proof to a problem that has baffled the best scholars in Europe. If intelligence earns freedom, if a mind proves a man, then I have more claim to liberty than half the people bidding today. This sale is not only wrong, it is absurd. The room exploded. Men were shouting, women gasping. Pierce hammered for order. Jonathan screamed that Benjamin had gone mad from too much learning. Some in the crowd yelled to drag him off. Others shouted to let him finish. Judge Aldrich stood. "I want to see that proof." In the middle of the uproar, a man in a plain dark coat pushed his way forward and climbed the steps to the platform. He held up a notebook. "Marcus Webb, New York Tribune," he announced loudly. "I've taken down every word this young man just said, and it will be printed in New York within the weekend in every abolition paper from Boston to Cincinnati. The whole country will know what happened here today." That changed everything. A northern reporter in the room meant this was no longer just a mobile transaction. It was national news waiting to happen. Jonathan snatched the papers from Benjamin's hand. "Meaningless nonsense. The boy can parrot tricks, nothing more." Judge Aldrich took the pages, scanned them for 3 long minutes, brow furrowed deeper with every line. At last he looked up, stunned. "I am no mathematician," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "but this is no parlor game. This is original, sophisticated work. I withdraw my bid. I came to buy a servant, not to purchase a man who may well be my intellectual superior. This sale must be stopped until the courts decide what we have just witnessed." Mrs. Crane stood as well, face pale but firm. "I withdraw also." Hamilton Pierce looked like a man watching his career catch fire. Jonathan stood on the platform red-faced and shaking, suddenly understanding that the fortune he had counted on might slip through his fingers and that the name Whitmore was about to become the most controversial story in America. The room sounded like a sudden gust moving through tall pines, whispers, gasps, chairs creaking as people turned to their neighbors. Judge Aldrich's words still hung in the air. Mrs. Helena Crane rose again, her voice steady. "I stand with the judge. I withdraw my bid." Hamilton Pierce brought his gavel down hard. Crack. "This sale is suspended until the courts decide the matter. All bids are cancelled. There will be no auction today." Jonathan Whitmore looked like a man who had just watched $10,000 vanish in front of his eyes. His face flashed shock, then fury, then cold, hard fear. Everything he had counted on was slipping away. Benjamin was led off the platform by 2 nervous employees, who clearly didn't know whether to treat him like property or a guest. They locked him in a small office, but they didn't put irons on him. Even they could feel the ground shifting. For the next 6 days, Mobile buzzed like a kicked beehive. On March 28th, the New York Tribune ran a front-page story. "The Slave Who Solved Mathematics. An Alabama Auction Lays Bare the Lie of Slavery." The piece spread like wildfire through northern papers. Overnight, Benjamin Bell was famous. Judge Aldrich quietly sent Benjamin's handwritten proof to 2 mathematics professors at the University of Virginia. The professors came to Mobile themselves. After 2 days of study, they reported, the proof had errors, but the thinking behind it was brilliant. Work that would have earned honors at any college in the country. Northern lawyers working with abolition groups rushed to file freedom suits for Benjamin and every other person from Riverside Academy. They demanded Dr. Whitmore's journals. When the journals arrived in court, 30 years of careful records told a story no one could ignore. Then an old man walked into the courthouse carrying a yellowed paper. His name was Isaac Bell. He said he was Benjamin's grandfather, and the paper was a legal manumission from Virginia, dated 1809, freeing Benjamin's grandmother. If it was real, Benjamin's mother had been born free, and that meant Benjamin himself had never legally been a slave at all. Jonathan screamed forgery, but proving it took time. On March 29th, a local judge ruled that Benjamin could not be sold or moved until everything was settled. He was released into the care of a Methodist church in Mobile that looked after the city's small free black community. Jonathan panicked. On April 2nd, he quietly sold the entire Riverside Academy property to a group of planters who turned it back into a cotton plantation the next week. The remaining students, Clara, Thomas, Daniel, and the rest were sold off in private deals, far from newspaper reporters. In 14 days, Dr. Whitmore's 30-year dream was wiped out. Only Benjamin was left. For 3 months, Benjamin lived in a strange half-freedom. He taught reading and numbers to free black children at the church, but he couldn't leave Mobile. And every day, he waited to see whether a judge would send him back into chains. Then, in June, Mrs. Helena Crane, the same widow who had almost bought him for $10,000, came forward with a surprising offer. She would buy Benjamin from Jonathan, not to own him, but to set him free the very next day. The price came down to $6,000. She wrote a private letter explaining why. I have 3 daughters. I want them to grow up in a country that honors minds, not skin. $6,000 is a price I can pay. Living with the knowledge that courage like his was crushed is a price I cannot pay. On July 7, 1860, the papers were signed. Jonathan took the money and washed his hands of the whole mess. On July 15th, the Mobile County Court officially recorded Benjamin Bell as a free man. Like every freed person in Alabama, he had to leave the state within 30 days and never return without permission. But he was free. On August 1, 1860, Benjamin boarded a steamer headed to Boston. In his trunk he carried letters of introduction from Mrs. Crane, a warm recommendation from Judge Aldrich, and copied pages from Dr. Whitmore's journals that proved everything he had learned. What happened after that gets a little hazy, the way old trails do. We know a Benjamin Bell entered Harvard as a special student that September, paid for by Northern Friends of Freedom. He studied mathematics and science for 2 years until the war pulled everything apart. In 1862, he left college to work for the Union Army, using his gift for numbers to plan supply lines and crack complicated logistics problems. Army letters still exist that mention Mr. Bell, the colored mathematician with real gratitude. After the war, the trail scatters. There's a teacher named Benjamin Bell at a freedmen's school in Georgia in 1866. A Professor Benjamin Bell, teaching college math in Ohio in 1872. Between 1875 and 1889, several important mathematics papers appear under the name Benjamin T. Bell. Maybe they're all the same man moving carefully through a world that still wasn't sure what to make of him. What we know for certain is this. After August 1860, Benjamin Bell never set foot in Alabama again. The great public auctions of educated slaves never happened again either. The scandal of March 23rd scared everyone away. In 1861, the Alabama legislature sealed every record of the Royal Street sale and Benjamin's case. Those boxes are still locked up today. Historians have asked to see them for 160 years. Every request is refused, always with polite talk about privacy and racial sensitivities. Everyone in the story has been dead for more than a century, so the excuse wears thin. Maybe the state is hiding forged papers, or proof of kidnapping, or simple embarrassment that a 19-year-old bay called property outthought every white man in the room. Benjamin's story never completely disappeared, though. It was passed down in black schools and churches as living proof that the system's worst lie was just a lie. Then, in 1897, a thick package arrived at the American Mathematical Society in New York, postmark, Cleveland, Ohio. Inside was a neatly bound book titled Reflections on Mathematical Discovery and the Nature of Intelligence, by Benjamin T. Bell. Part autobiography, part mathematics, part quiet victory. In the opening pages he wrote, I was once priced like cattle, because of the color of my skin. On March 23, 1860, I chose to speak the truth instead of bowing to the price. This book is the rest of that conversation, and somewhere, in a dusty vault in Montgomery, the state of Alabama is still keeping its official reply locked away. The letter that came with the manuscript was only a few lines long, written in a steady, elderly hand. I am now 76 years old. I have lived long enough to see slavery itself destroyed, though not all the shadows it left behind. I send this book to you, so that one clear record will exist, in a place scholars trust, proving a truth that should never have needed proving. Intelligence does not come from race. It comes from books, from teachers, from the simple chance to learn. I was called a wonder, but I was only a boy who was handed books instead of chains. Thousands of others could have done everything I did, and more, if they had been handed the same chance. This work is for them, for the minds that were starved in cotton fields, for the brilliance that died nameless. Benjamin T. Bell, Cleveland, Ohio, January 1897. The American Mathematical Society put the manuscript in a box, labeled it, and slid it onto a shelf. They never published it. The math was good but not revolutionary by the late 1890s, and the personal story was too raw, too political, too uncomfortable for a scholarly society that preferred quiet equations to angry truths. It sat there for decades, looked at now and then by a curious researcher, then forgotten again. In 1968, a graduate student doing civil rights CRA research stumbled across it, read it in one sitting, and wrote a short article that started the whispers all over again. Suddenly, Benjamin Bell was part of a bigger conversation about education, about opportunity, about the stories a nation tells itself to sleep at night. People started asking the question that still hangs in the air today. What happened to the other The honest answer is heartbreaking. After the public auction collapsed, Jonathan Whitmore sold them quietly, one by one, far from newspaper reporters. Their names are all written neatly in Dr. Whitmore's journals. 40 bright, educated human beings, but after April 1860, most of them simply disappear from the written record. A few may have lived to see freedom in 1865. Most we will never find. Their brilliance was scattered like seed on rocky ground. That is the real tragedy of Benjamin Bell's story. He wasn't extraordinary because he was the only genius. He was extraordinary because he was one of the only ones who got the chance to show it. For every Benjamin who stood on that platform and spoke truth to power, there were thousands who never got near a book, whose names we will never know, whose inventions were never built, whose music was never written, whose cures were never discovered simply because the world decided at birth that they were meant to carry cotton, not ideas. So yes, I believe Benjamin lived to 76. I believe he spent his last quiet years in Cleveland writing that memoir by lamplight, trying to give voice to all the voices that were silenced. And I believe those sealed boxes in Montgomery still sit in a back room somewhere, gathering dust, because even today, some truths are too sharp to let out in the open. What do you think? Do you believe he really made it to 1897 and sent that package? Do you think he spent his life carrying the weight of the 39 who didn't make it out? Drop your thoughts below. Tell me where you think Benjamin Bell ended up, what name he used, what he taught, what he still wanted the world to understand, and if this story moved you, if it made you angry, or proud, or just grateful that someone, somewhere, refused to stay silent, then do one small thing: hit subscribe, ring the bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because every time this story gets told, another piece of those forgotten voices comes back to life, and maybe, just maybe, one day those sealed records will finally be opened, and we'll get to meet the other 39 all over again.